All right, moving on here, what I want to do is just cover a few of the basic divine attributes that probably need a little bit of clarification. We'll spend more time on some of the other definitions and concepts when we get to our discussion boards, and I may post some other things online for you to review. But right now, I want to cover some of the big ones, so to speak. And probably the first one, on or about page 9, I get into the definitions here. And remember, an attribute is really a conception that we have of God. It's an idea we have, and it's something that we can properly say about the nature of God. So we attribute a characteristic, we properly say something about God. And the important thing here is that these concepts truly represent who and what God is in his very essence and very character. So to start with, on the top, on or about of page 9 of the Theology Proper Part 2 handout, what we've got here is the concept of the unity of God. And this is significant because as Trinitarian monotheists, we really need to dive a little bit deeper into this, because when we think about unity or the oneness of God, ours is different from a deist or a Unitarian or a Muslim who, again, as monotheists, they're monotheists. They believe there's one creator God, but they always have one person who is that one creator God. Trinitarians have three persons that are the eternal one true creator God. So unity, I'm going to read these, and these are taken roughly from Richard Muller's Dictionary of Latin and Greek Theological Terms. So for virtually all the attributes, you get the basic definition that I'm using from those books. So here, I'm reading here oneness. Says, especially as an attribute of God, the unity of God means God is one in an absolute sense because there is no other God, and because the one God is an absolute unity incapable of division. So unity indicates, therefore, there is no genus God. There's not another one like him that can be put in the same category. That's what it means, there's no genus God. So even though you might argue that there's a genus, a category God, and if we come across a being that has all these incommunicable attributes, we should put him or sort him into the category true and living God, okay? But some people would say there's no genus because there's no second one of the same kind or type. So then you move forward and talk about the unity of God. Two concepts arise. First, what we call the unity of singularity, or what we call numerical oneness. Now, if you're going to be a true monotheist, okay, and I mentioned this in some of my previous lectures, the idea of a substance as an existing essence, all right? When we talk about God, there's only one of them, numeric oneness. In the category or genus God, there is only one existing essence, one divine substance, numerically considered. Now, to try and understand that, by contrast, if we have the genus Homo sapiens, or human beings, see, there's the essence of a human being, which is all those properties or characteristics that make a human being. But right now, the population of the earth is about 8 billion people. So what we would say is that there are 8 billion numerically distinct instances of the human essence in that category. There isn't just one of them. So when we talk about monotheism, true monotheism, again, Trinitarians are the true, genuine monotheists. We represent the true and the living God. That we want to make sure we explain it well to our antagonist that no, we are saying there is only numerically one existing essence, numerically one divine substance that is distinct and individually existing. Now, if you maintain that, you're maintaining true monotheism. But then secondarily, which will actually lead us into the second attribute we need to talk about, is going to bring us back to the distinctions that we talked about early on, and that is a unity of simplicity. And this is one that's important because in most of the older scholastic systems, you had simplicity as one of the first divine attributes listed, which again, is a deduction from other divine attributes. Just like the Trinity, you infer or put together from all the biblical passages. Simplicity is simply a statement that says God is not a composite being. Okay, period. God is not made of parts. And some of the reasoning for that, which we'll go into later on in our discussions, would simply be if God is made of parts, it just seems to conflict with our concepts of monotheism. So, for example, if we have God who is an eternal, independent being, okay, and God is made of parts, you could ask a legitimate question, who put the parts together? Because when we look at everything that exists in the created universe that's made of parts, we know that it didn't actually assemble itself. It was dependent on something else to put those parts together. Everything from our human bodies, quote, we didn't put our own parts together. We came from somebody before us. So the point is this, is that if God is made of parts, it is at least reasonable to ask the question that if everything else we've ever seen didn't assemble itself, well then who assembled God? And that would make God not an independent being, but a dependent being. So the doctrine of simplicity is not just a holdover from some sort of overthinking or over pietistic past. It actually has extreme relevance for trying to maintain things like divine independence. Also to the concept, if God is made of parts, what are the parts made of? See, if God is eternal, and let's just say for the sake of argument, God has 30 attributes, well, would all of those attributes independently be eternal attributes? Would they all be self-existing attributes? See where I'm going with this? So if you have 30 existing, eternal, independent things that exist as a composite thing, it sort of throws our concept of monotheism off, because if technically things like self-existence and eternality are incommunicable attributes of the monotheistic God, but each of these parts independently have attributes of self-existence and eternality and infinity and things like that. Now it's starting to look like we have 30 gods. So we want to be careful that we don't, again, when we think about divine simplicity, when we approach the question, we want to make sure that we don't make God a composite being. So when we distinguish the divine attributes, we don't say there's no distinction in God, and we don't say, as we've said, that there's a real or essential distinction between the divine attributes. Because remember, real or essential distinction is distinguishing them into independently existing things that can be put together or taken apart. So that's why, again, so if God is composite, it raises big problems. If there's no distinction in God, which is another problem, if we say that the essence is completely identical with each attribute, then you can make a really good case if people are saying there's really no distinction whatsoever between the essence and the attributes. You make a good case that if the attributes mean the same thing, they don't mean anything. And that our language about God, you can make a case, doesn't have any meaning, because if omnipotence is exactly identical to aseity, which is exactly identical to love, I mean, definitionally, propositionally, I don't know how you reconcile that and make anything meaningful out of it. And so that's why we start thinking about our knowledge of God, being able to conceptualize an attribute like love and understand it as distinct from omnipotence or aseity. We could say that, yes, we don't have a divided composite being, but we have these conceptions actually mean something that are true about God. So that's the concept of divine simplicity. A couple others here before we take another break. Aseity, I've already mentioned in a previous lecture, but here I want to distinguish between the divine attribute of ontological aseity, because now we have one existing divine substance, and the point is the being of God, ontologically speaking, you have a single attribute of the divine being that is self-existence, okay? That's ontological aseity. But what's important is that we distinguish that from the concept of personal aseity. There are three persons of the Trinity, and some, I think, have rightly raised the problem is that if we say that the persons self-exist, well, then the question would say, well, then doesn't it follow if the persons have independent self-existence, it seems to necessitate that we have three self-existing gods and not a single God with a single property of self-existence. So that's why when we get later on in some of our Christological studies, we're going to come back to this distinction between ontological aseity and personal aseity, because we have to have all three Trinitarian persons sharing the same undivided divine essence to really maintain monotheism. So that's one more concept. And then a last one here I really want to think about, and then we'll take a quick break, is the concept of God as a perfect being and what we mean by the perfections of God. And here, to read it in the syllabus, it says the perfection of God, it means the highest or most complete condition of anything or attribute. Thus, the fullness or complete actuality of a thing or attribute. So perfection indicates both transcendence of mutation and fulfillment of all potential or potency. So here, and again, very important, we think about classic perfect being theology. It has a specific meaning, and unfortunately, there are a lot of folks in the evangelical church today that don't like the concept of perfect being theology or classical theology. But actually, I think if we look at the biblical attributes, I think we'd have to conclude that yes, God is a perfect being. What does perfect mean? Well, I mean, the idea of the English word perfect is really, we go back to the Greek root, where the real concept is telos. And the telos as a semantic range is variously translated as purpose or goal. And you go all the way over to the concept of, in the semantic range, of perfect or complete. See, at the beginning, if you intend to do something, the idea is you have something in mind and you want to bring it to what? Completion. So if we look at the far end of telos, it has the idea of something being complete or lacking nothing for what it is intended to be or what it is. So substitute the word complete for perfect, and now we have God as a complete being. And with respect to God's immutability, his eternality, it's important that we think about, for example, God's love. Well, God can never be more loving or less loving than he has always been. God already has all power. God can never have less power or more power. He's always complete in power, complete in knowledge, complete in love and justice and mercy. And that's ultimately, when we think about what perfect being theology is God is complete in every way. He doesn't need to grow, and he has always had every perfection or every aspect of every attribute. Like I said, he's had all power, all knowledge. He's completely loving. He doesn't lack any love. So that's really the idea of perfect being theology. And of course, this would relate to things like divine immutability. God can't be less loving or more loving than he's always been. God can't have less power or more power, or less knowledge or more knowledge than he's always had, properly understood. So this is part of, classical perfect being theology, and it just seems to make sense based on everything we know about the attributes in Scripture. Now, what we're going to do after this in the next segment is look at some pretty important things like, okay, God exists with these certain attributes, but now we want to think about God in relation to the creation and how is God present, okay? Because it's significant because where is God? Well, where is your soul? Okay, so we want to start thinking about and contemplating the concept of presence and how that relates to God, the Christian life, and just existence per se. Thanks.